Hey everybody, welcome back to All Fiction is Fantasy. Daniel here. I hope you're doing well, and if you're not, I hope you are soon. Okay, today I'm just going to do a kind of a casual reading roundup, a casual talk about some of the books that I have been reading. Some of them we will talk about just briefly, some in a little more detail, and some of them I will be featuring much more detailed reviews down the road. One series in particular. But I have been reading quite a few books lately, and I just haven't haven't really felt like talking about them, I guess you could say. So that's why there hasn't been a video in a while on the channel. But anyway, let's start with a book that I just got a day or so ago from the time of recording this video. And man, I am in love with this book. It is called A Reader's Guide to Fantasy, and it is written by Baird Searles, Beth Meacham, and Michael Franklin. And this was originally published in 1982, and it is basically an encyclopedic snapshot of what was going on in the world of fantasy fiction as of 1982. So I know some people, well, and maybe even younger people watching this might be saying, well, this is like completely out of date. Especially with the internet, with Wikipedia, and with being able to search for stuff. And while the internet is great for searching for things, that's kind of the key word is you have to know what to search for. If you're looking for an author, if you're looking for a particular book or a story, it's very easy to search for that. But what the internet is not good for is the things that you don't know to search for. And so that's where something like this is incredibly valuable because of the way this is presented in a concise, condensed, and directed fashion. Just reading this, you will discover so many things that you didn't even know to search for. You know, I'm pretty versed in fantasy. I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm maybe at a 6, maybe a 5. I don't claim to be an expert at all, but I've read a lot. I have a lot still to read. And even with my collection of like sword and sorcery and heroic fiction, just reading this book for a day, I have already discovered like a handful of books that that I want to buy. And I already ordered a bunch of them on eBay. So this is really cool. So this is a comprehensive source of writers and works from the magical to mystical to supernatural for every lover of fantasy, for newcomers just discovering many marvelous worlds of fantasy, for devoted fans exploring the field in search of the best and the newest, with full listings of authors, titles, series, categories, and award winners, plus a fascinating overview of fantasy's past, present, and future. But let's just take a look at a couple of popular authors here and just kind of see the kind of information that this provides. Let's take a look at somebody like now William Hope Hodgson here. So William Hope Hodgson, the Englishman, could well be called the Herman Melville of fantasy, since the sea plays a major role in most of his fiction. The sea, in turn, played a major role in his life. Much of the early part of it was spent as a seaman, which led to winning the Royal Humane Society's Medal for Heroism, as well as involvement in the crusade for seamen's rights. He was also a pioneering bodybuilder, a lecturer, a photographer of talent. When that art was relatively new, he was killed in World War I. So, of course, William Hope Hodgson wrote a lot of ghost stories, the Boats of the Glencarrig, the Ghost Pirate stories. Really cool. The Nightland and the House on the Borderlands. Really great kind of early weird fiction. So here we have Robert E. Howard. Like his friend and colleague as writer for Weird Tales, H.P. Lovecraft succeeded in establishing a contemporary mythology which has grown far beyond his own writings. Also with Lovecraft, Howard did not live to see how popular his creations were to become. He committed suicide in 1936 at the age of 31. Man, that is so sad. Just to think about Robert E. Howard living longer and what he would have contributed even more to the world of fantasy and to the world of fantastic fiction. It would certainly never have crossed his mind that he would be thought of by many as one of the two major 20th century influences on fantasy, the other Tolkien, of course. And one of the things that I did discover here, and I was just kind of flipping through and looking for the authors that it was mentioning: Tanith Lee, Chardon Le Fanu, Love Le Fanu, The Drunkard's Dream, Ursula K. Le Guin, C.S. Lewis, David Lindsay, H.P. Lovecraft, George MacDonald, Brian Lumley, R.I.P. Yeah, Brian Lumley just died. We lost an absolute legend. And I will actually be covering quite a few of his books this year on the channel. The main thing that they cover on in here is the Titus Crow series, because I think that was kind of like the main work of fantasy that he was known for as of 1982. Arthur Machen. I'm trying to find, let me find here Joanna Russ. So Joanna Russ is largely known as a feminist science fiction writer, and she has written some amazing things. But I had no idea that she wrote a sword and sorcery series. And this says that in 1967 and 1968, Joanna Russ wrote a brief series of sword and sorcery short stories. The stories are about Alex, a rough and tumble independent woman. Alex is, if not charming, then witty, passionate, light-fingered, and very good with a knife. She is a thief and a vagabond. And the world she inhabits is very like Fritz Leiber's New One. That sounds amazing. I had no idea that Joanna Russ wrote some sword and sorcery. So I immediately ordered that on eBay. I ordered the omnibus version. I had no idea. I would have never known to even search for sword and sorcery written by Joanna Russ. So it's that kind of little discoveries that a book like this makes possible. But this section has so much great information in it. And then here we get a whole bunch of different series. And these are series as established by authors, told in alphabetical order. So we have Joan Aiken, Pierce Anthony, Robert Aspen, L. Frank Baum, of course, The Wizard of Oz, James Blish, James Branch Cabell, Lynn Carter's various series, L. Sprague de Camp and Fletcher Platt, Peter Dickinson, Stephen R. Donaldson, Lord Dunsany, E. Edison, or E.R. Edison, I should say. Sorry about that. Gardner F. Fox, Kothar and Kirik. Jane Gaskell, another woman writer who I had no idea had this sword and sorcery saga called the Atlan Saga. And that's another one that I recently just purchased. And that is a kind of fantasy, lost world sword and sorcery series set in South America. So that sounds really interesting. All of Robert E. Howard's Conan stuff, John Jakes, Brack the Barbarian. What do we have? Tanith Lee, Ursula K. Le Guin, Fritz Leiber, C.S. Lewis, Brian Lumley, Talbot Mundy. Yeah, so just all kinds of different series that were available at the time. And then here we get into that really interesting chapter I told you about in the intro, but beyond the fields we know, there and back again, that old black magic. So those are common kind of tropes and phrases that are used in fantasy. And then what they do is they take each one of those and then they give you a whole bunch of recommendations based on that. So there and back again, we have Almuric by Robert E. Howard, the Cloud Forest by Joan North, The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath by H.P. Lovecraft, the Green Star series by Lynn Carter, The King of Elfland's Daughter, Lord Dunsany. We have The Ship of Ishtar, a Merit, and then we have Beyond the Fields We Know, of course, the Lord Dunsany collection. So these are all stories that are set in completely magical worlds that have kind of no grounding to our real world. So there we have the Alex stories by Joanna Russ, the Chronicles of Middle-earth, J.R. Tolkien. What else do we have? The Conan series by Robert E. Howard. I might argue that that is not actually Beyond the Fields We Know, because I'm pretty sure Howard did use some historical basis for, at least some geographical historical basis for his world. But here we have the Elric series, the Earthsea trilogy, Gormenghast trilogy. We have the Legion from the Shadows, Carl Edward Wagner. And then we have also Unicorns in the Garden, some more like fairy tales. We have, where was the next one? Is That Old Black Magic? Lots of A. Merritt here. We have Burn Witch Burn by A. Merritt. The Three Impostors by Arthur Machen. The Shadow over Innsmouth by H.P. Lovecraft. Seven Footprints to Satan by A. Merritt. We have Bambi's Children, so things about animals. So I would call this probably a beast epic section. But we have Bambi, Bambi's Children, the Circle of Light series by Neil Hancock, the Dr. Dolittle series. What else do we have here? The Plague Dogs by Richard Adams and Watership Down, of course. And then the Once and Future King. So this is kind of a king and court style fantasy there. And then here we get into the 7 League Shelf. And so this is a listing of their cream of the crop. This is their Appendix N. And I think it's actually a really good listing of kind of some of the best of fantasy. So we have The Broken Sword, Paul Anderson, The Wizard of Oz, The Last Unicorn, A Dark Carnival, Ray Bradbury. That would later, I think, be collected and reprinted as The October Country, which is one of my favorite collections of short stories. We have Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, The King of Elfland's Daughter, The Circus of Dr. Lao. Yes, any best of list that includes that automatically gets kudos from me. The Weird Stone of Brinsingham and the Moon of Gomroth, the Atlan Saga, The Wind in the Willows, She, The House on the Borderland. That's kind of a left field pick there. Conan, Ghost Stories of an Antiquity by M.R. James. That's a great pick there. The Jungle Books by Rudy Kipling. Fritz Lieber, the Fafhrd and Grey Mouser series. This is a great selection from C.S. Lewis, Till We Have Faces. Totally out of left field. I would have thought they would have picked Narnia, but yeah, Till We Have Faces is fantastic. The Shadows over Innsmouth. Gifts of the Christ Child by George MacDonald. So I've only read, I think, one really early thing by MacDonald. And I would like to explore more, especially given his Christian roots. Very, very interesting. The Riddlemaster trilogy, The Ship of Ishtar, To the Chapel Perilous, the Elric series, The Black God's Shadow, The Five Children and It. I have never even heard of Edith Nesbit. So that's one author I'm going to have to look into. The Gormenghast trilogy, The Fall of the House of Usher, Dracula, The Chronicles of Middle-earth, The Once and Future King, Charles Williams' War in Heaven. I have no idea what that is. Great Tales of the Terror and Supernatural, a really popular collection of horror fiction. And then also Islandia by Austin Tappan Wright. That is another work and another author that I am completely unfamiliar with. And then here we have a collection of award winners and also finally a history of fantasy in literature. So yeah, I am in love with this book. I am going to treasure this thing, pore over it, and discover all kinds of new authors and new works to read. I have a feeling that if this had come out, or if I had known about this, it was out when I was a kid. If I had discovered this in 1982 as a kid at the library, this would have been such an important book to the development of my hobby life. And this would have been one of those books. I don't know if you guys ever had those books or magazines that you really liked as a kid, and you carried everywhere with you and you read it over and over and over again, just devouring every word, just soak every last bit of information from. And this would have been one of those books. So I do recommend this, even though it's a little out of date. I do recommend it. And I would have loved to have seen kind of an updated version of this published in 1990 so that it could have covered the entire decade of the 80s. Because for me, the 80s is kind of the decade of the 80s is really where my real love of fantasy kind of ends. You know, everything from the early 1900s up through 1990 is kind of like my wheelhouse of fantasy. Okay, next let's talk about this series here, The Jade Demons by Robert E. Vardeman. So I read book 1 and I liked book 1 enough to go on to book 2. I started book 2 and there were some things that I didn't like about book 1. It was very repetitive. I thought the world building was really poor. It just didn't make much sense. The naming conventions of the characters, there wasn't any like kind of rhyme or reason as to how they were named. And it didn't really, none of their names really matched up with the kind of pan-Asian, kind of Asian fusion world that Vardeman created. There was a lot of disconnect between the characters. I never really thought the characters were really heroic, that they were actually going to be able to do the things that they were setting out to do, but I was entertained. And so I went on to book 2. And book 2 did not fix any of the issues I had. So I ended up stopping the series at book 2, and I'm not going to continue. It's just not worth my time. And so this is kind of a really quick bad review of the Jade Demon series by Robert E. Vardeman, which includes The Quaking Lands, which was okay. The Frozen Waves just kind of drops off even further and doesn't fix any of the issues. And then I have no idea how books 3 and 4 are, The Crystal Clouds and The White Fire. It's really too bad. I love the cover art, and I like Sword and Sorcery with a cool female lead, but she just wasn't a very good character. What was her name here? Kassira. Yeah, Kassira. And then she's joined by this talking bird named Zolkan. They misspell it there. And a wolf boy named Mollymo. And the wolf boy's pretty cool, but he can't really control when he changes into a wolf. He's like a changeling. But over and over and over again, full of repetition, just repeated over and over again. He changes back and she has to coax him back into becoming human. And it just repeats that. It seems like every chapter, that same plot point is used like 2 times, something like 2 times. So yeah, I was pretty disappointed in this. I was really hoping to discover this kind of hidden gem, but unfortunately, I am not going to continue this series. However, one series by Vardeman that I am continuing, and I am loving is the Swords of Ramlin. So I have read books 1 and 2 of this so far, and I just started book 3 yesterday. So we have 2 Demons Bound, a Yoke of Magic, and the Blood Fountain. And then there's also books 4, 5, and 6. So we have Death's Acolyte, The Beasts of the Mist, and The Crown and Kingdom. And I know there is 3 more books published much later. I'm not going to read those, mainly because they are not in the same mass market printing editions with the same cover artist. So those are much later, and I believe those are only ebooks on Kindle or something. But this series is really fun, guys. I'm having a blast with it. It's not great. This is, B grades fantasy. These remind me of the kind of fantasy movies that they would have made in the 80s after Conan and after Beastmaster. So it's not great literature, but I am super entertained. And I never really know what's going to happen from one minute to the next. All kinds of wild stuff happens. It is really, really cruel to its female character. And I've heard that the payoff comes later where she finally gets to get revenge. She's keeping this list of all the people who have wronged her. And I'm really hoping that she does get revenge because I want to see something good happen to her because nothing good happens to her in these 3 books. Let me tell you about it. But yeah, these are pretty cool. So the first one, actually, I'm not going to cover these in detail because I am going to do a detailed review of the first 3 as one video, and then I'll do the 4, 5, and 6 as another video. But I did want to mention that this is what I am currently reading, and I am liking this a lot. It's super, super entertaining. Okay, a couple other things that I am reading or have read. Sorry for the glare here. These are bro-darted, so very, very shiny here. But this was the first book I read in 2024, and that was The Weird Works of Robert E. Howard, Volume 4, Wings in the Night. Wings in the Night. My God, what a fantastic story. Maybe my favorite Robert E. Howard story. I love Solomon Kane. I think Solomon Kane is an infinitely more interesting character than Conan. Conan is not a good character. I'm sorry. I'm just going to come out and say it. I like Conan. I like the Conan stories, but every story that Conan is in, he is by far the least interesting thing about that story. Conversely, Solomon Kane is always the most interesting thing about his stories. And I greatly prefer Solomon Kane over Conan as a character. And man, Wings in the Night. What a story. If you all have not read that story, I highly recommend it. It is one of the greatest stories of revenge I have ever read. The revenge that Solomon Kane gets on this clan of harpies is insane. And it is so brutal and done with so much patience and precision. I just love it. But in this collection, that was one of the best. I think Worms of the Earth is a fantastic story. The Phoenix of the Sword, it was one of the first, if not the first Conan story I did not like at all. The Scarlet Citadel is okay. The Tower of the Elephant is fantastic, of course. A short poem called Arkham. But the standouts here are The Worms of the Earth, Wings in the Night, and The Tower of the Elephant. So all in all, a pretty good collection, volume 4. I've got this entire set of the complete weird works of Robert E. Howard. Then I'm also reading this collection of nonfiction by L. Sprague de Camp called The Conan Reader. And this is just all kinds of essays that he wrote about Conan, things that were published in that fan magazine called Amra. But here we have Conan's Ghost, Memories of Robert E. Howard, The Trail of Tranicos, The Hyborian Technology, Pirates, Conan and Matho, Conan and Pizarro, Conan's Great-Grandfather, Conan's Imitators, Pratt's Parallel Worlds, Knights and Knaves in Nestria, El Ron and the City of Brass, and an exegesis of Howard's Hyborian tales. So just a really cool collection of nonfiction written by L. Sprague de Camp. Talks a lot about how he was kind of like brought into the Conan world, kind of out, not from his own doing, but he just kind of landed in that spot at the right time to have an impact in Conan's fiction and in Robert E. Howard's continuing popularity. I think you could probably make an analogy that L. Sprague de Camp was to Robert E. Howard as August Derleth was to H.P. Lovecraft or something like that. But yeah, this is great. I like reading these kinds of old snapshots of history about these great old fantasy stories. And we don't really have a lot of stuff like this, but we do have a lot of stuff like this about Conan. Maybe just not other writers, other characters, and other writers like Robert E. Howard. But this is really cool. I'm really enjoying working through this slowly. Okay, next up we have some modern sword and sorcery, and that is The Eye of Sunu, written by Skylar Hernstrom and published by DMR Books. DMR Books is doing a ton of great work on modern sword and sorcery and reprinting classic sword and sorcery. And this is very much in the vein of Jack Vance, of Dying Earth. So this is Dying Earth heroic fantasy. And there are some fantastic stories in here, especially the first story. So my friends, two of my friends read this book, and then I read it after them. And they both told me that the first story, The Gift of the Obman, was the worst in the collection. For me, it was the best. I love that story so much. And I wish the book would have focused on that character a little more, on the character of Sonu and how he gets this third eye kind of thrust upon him by these fungus men. And man, it's so good. But there are some fantastic stories in here. It is very much that kind of Dying Earth science fantasy. There's even some post-apocalyptic type stories. There's like robots mixed with sword and sorcery and necromancy and all kinds of stuff. It's super cool. But I think Gifts of the Obman is great. The Tragedy of Thurn is great. Images of the Goddess is pretty wild. That is a fantastic story. The Space Witch is okay. The First American was not my favorite. I think these two, The First American and The Law of Wolves, I didn't really enjoy. But then we have Mortu and Kairos and The White City and The Star God's Grave are both fantastic. But yeah, if you're looking for a good example of modern sword and sorcery, modern Dying Earth style fantasy, I think you will really like The Eye of Sonu. It comes highly recommended. So Skylar Hernstrom is still writing. And he has another collection out that I haven't purchased yet. But originally, these stories that are collected in here were actually from a newer kind of anthology magazine published in 2016. So we have Cersofa, Heroic Fantasy and Science Fiction magazine. We have issue number 1 from spring of 2016, issue number 2, summer 2016, and issue number 3, fall 2016. And so these you can still get. I believe these are print on demand from Amazon. But yeah, I don't know. I'm really looking forward to kind of diving into these and maybe discovering some other authors who might be as good as Skylar Hernstrom. We will see about that. But if you're interested in these, you can get them on Amazon, and I think they're about $10 a piece. And I believe they are print on demand publications. And then finally, I've also been reading quite a few comic books lately, and I'm rediscovering my love for the old Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Usagi Yojimbo. This is actually new Usagi Yojimbo and Turtles. But I was in fourth grade or so when I discovered the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and this was at least 3 years before the cartoon. So I discovered them on a whim on a newsstand. They had an early issue. So I had all of the early issues in black and white, of course. And then I discovered After the Bomb and the TMNT RPG. And then later the cartoon came out. And the cartoon came out when I was in 6th or 7th grade, maybe the summer in between those 2 years. And man, that was a huge disappointment. They took something that was really cool and made it really crappy. Even as a kid, I was not into the cartoon at all. For some reason, they turned the turtles, who were total badasses and real ninjas, into pizza-eating morons. And so I kind of noped out of the turtles at that point. But going back and rereading all of the old black and white turtle stuff, oh, it's so good. I love Eric Talbot's art, and he's not in volume 1 here, but Eric Talbot, when he comes in, man, it gets so good. But even Eastman and Lair's art and stuff was also pretty good. But it's been a real blast collecting these Ultimate collections. So many great stories. And then I always loved Stan Sakai and Usagi Yojimbo. And I like the crossovers with Usagi and the Turtles. And I went to a comic book store recently close by, and there was a new collection that the owner told me about. And man, this is some really good stuff. I also have the Dark Horse collection of the early Usagi and Turtles stuff, and I love that. But this is pretty fantastic here. And I really like the way that the art looks. Stan Sakai's art is just keeps improving. It keeps getting better, but it still kind of maintains that somewhat amateurish style that I love about his art. It's very, very cool. And I've read the first story in here, and it's pretty good. So I'm hoping that there's going to be more crossovers in the future. But all right, guys. Well, hey, that's what I've been reading the last month, and what I am reading now, and what I am continuing to read into the near future. Look forward. I might do a full review of the Eyes of Sunu for part of the Sword and Sorcery Saga series. I'm not sure. I will definitely be doing a full review of the Swords of Ramlin. And that is actually from Robert Vardeman and G.O.W. Proctor. I should say that this was a collaboration. Vardeman did quite a few collaborations, and I think the one he is most well known for is called The War of Powers, and that's also a 6-part series. So, all right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. We will talk to you later. Bye-bye.